The Fire King structure deck is here and it's going to change the Yu-Gi-Oh meta. So today I'm going to give you everything you need to know about Fire Kings. What's potion? You got Matt here and welcome back to the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video. The Fire King structure deck is finally here and people are so excited. It is one of the best structure decks we've ever gotten. From the release of brand new cards that support a fan favorite archetype to the incredible staples that have been reprinted, everyone is going crazy for this deck. With that in mind, I'll be covering the Fire King archetype, including an overview on what the cards do and how the deck works, cards and engines that you'll want to pair with it, and even cards that are going to help you beat it. So if you're excited for the video, then make sure to smash the like button. If this video hits 125 likes, I'll bring you the ultimate Fire King deck profile with options for budget players too. Also, if you enjoy deck profiles, combo guides, meta discussions, and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh videos just like this one, then you're going to love this channel. So make sure to subscribe and help us reach our end of year goal of 4,000 subscribers. That being said, it's time for us to find out how good is Fire King in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. Let's jump into it. So the first thing I usually want to talk about in these videos is going to be what do the cards even do, but in this case here it's a little bit different because there are so many Fire King cards. There are 10 main deck monsters, there's 5 spells, a trap, and a brand new extra deck monster as well. The main deck monsters are Fire King Avatar Arvata, Barong, Garunix, Kirin, YuGiOh, and Fire King High Avatar Garunix. Those 6 have been out for a few years, but the new ones being released in the structure deck are Fire King Avatar Rangbali, Fire King High Avatar Kirin, Legendary Fire King Ponix, and Sacred Fire King Garunix. Then we have the spells and traps. There are 2 quick plays, a field spell, a continuous spell, a normal spell, and a normal trap card. They are Circle of the Fire Kings, a quick play, Fire King Skyburn, also known as Fire King Sacred Immolation, a quick play spell, Fire King Island, the field spell, Fire King Sanctuary, the continuous spell, Onslaught of the Fire Kings, a normal spell, and Echelon of the Fire Kings, a normal trap. Now obviously a Fire King deck can't play each and every one of these cards for various different reasons, including consistency and power, so I won't be covering each and every one of them. These are the ones that won't be getting any extra attention for the rest of the video. But I do want to say that YuGiOh has a special place because that card in a very pure build of Fire King can be a decent extender, so just keep that in mind. So you know what the cards are, but what do they even do? Starting off with the main deck monsters, of which we're going to cover 6 of them. Each of their effects is a hard once per turn except for the first monster we're covering, which is Fire King Avatar Barong. If a face-up fire you control is destroyed by card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. During the next standby phase, after this card was destroyed by card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 Fire King card from your deck to your hand. It's very important to get the rulings on this right. This effect activates during the next standby phase after it was destroyed. It's not like Mirror Jade, which activates when it leaves the field and resolves in the end phase. Also, if Barong leaves the graveyard before the next standby phase, it can't activate its effects to search. The fact that the search effect isn't a once per turn though means that you can really abuse it if you play multiple copies. Fire King Avatar Arvata is the monster negate for the archetype. When a monster effect is activated while Arvata is on the field, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy 1 other fire monster in your hand or field. It's important to note that this doesn't destroy the monster activating the effect. Its second effect is that if this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 fire, beast, beast warrior, or wing beast monster in your graveyard except for itself as cost and special summon it, but its effects are negated and it's also destroyed during the end phase. Fire King Avatar Rangbali, also known as Fire King Avatar Hanuman, has 2 effects. If a face-up Fire King monster you control is destroyed by card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. When a spell or trap card or effect is activated while Rangbali is on the field, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy 1 other fire monster in your hand or face-up field. So Rangbali is the spell and trap negation, while Arvata is the monster negation. Legendary Fire King Ponix brings the entire deck together. Being a level 1 fire monster is insane for what this strategy wants to do and for the consistency. If your fire monster is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is normal or special summon, you can add 1 Fire King spell trap from your deck to your hand. And during the next standby phase, after this card was destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can add this card from your graveyard to your hand. Fire King High Avatar Kirin is also a new card. During the main phase, this card is in your hand. As a quick effect, you can destroy 1 other fire monster in your hand or face-up field, and if you do, special summon this card. If this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 Fire King from your hand or graveyard except for itself, and then you can destroy 1 card on the field, non-targeting. Sacred Fire King Garunix also has 2 effects. The first of which is if your fire monster is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand or graveyard. It's important to note though that if this card was not in your hand when the destruction occurred, but it was in your hand at the resolution, you can summon it from your hand still. That doesn't apply from the graveyard though. Its second effect is that if this card is normal or special summoned, you can destroy 1 fire, beast, beast warrior, or wing beast from your hand, deck, or face-up field except for itself, and if you do, it gains attack equal to half the destroyed monster's attack until the end phase. This gives you access to any powerful Fire King monster in your graveyard to activate its effects. Moving on to the spell cards, starting off with Fire King Island, the field spell. If this face-up card in the field spell zone is sent to the graveyard or banished, destroy all monsters you control. Once per turn, you can activate 1 of these 2 effects. Either during your main phase, you can destroy 1 monster in your hand or that you control, and if you do, add a Fire King monster from deck to hand. Or if you control no monsters, you can special summon 1 Fire Wing Beast from your hand, specifically Ponix or Garunix. Fire King Skyburn, also known as Fire King Sacred Immolation, the quick play spell, allows you to target the same number of Fire King monsters you control and cards your opponent controls as cost and destroy them. While in the graveyard, if a Fire King card you control would be destroyed by card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. And you can only use 1 effect of Fire King Skyburn per turn and only once that turn. Circle of the Fire King is also a solid option. You can target one fire monster you control and one fire monster in your graveyard as cost, destroy the first and special summon the other. Fire King Sanctuary is the continuous spell, where when it's activated you can place a Fire King island from your deck to your field spell zone. Once per turn, if a card in your field spell zone would be destroyed by a card effect, you can destroy one fire monster in your hand or face-up field instead. And arguably the most important effect is that once per turn, if your opponent special summons a monster, you can immediately after this effect resolves, Xyz summon one Fire Xyz monster using only Fire King monster you control as material. You can only activate one Fire King Sanctuary per turn. This is how most of the time you're going to be summoning out your extra deck monster. Speaking of the extra deck, our one extra deck monster is Garunix Eternity, Hyang of the Fire Kings. If Xyz summoned, you can destroy all other monsters on the field. For an ignition effect, you can detach one material from this card and target one spell or trap on the field as cost, destroy it, and if you do, this card gains 500 attack permanently. And finally, if this card is destroyed while it has material, you can special summon Fire King monsters from your graveyard up to the number of materials it had. There are 3 ways to categorize these cards. The first of which is going to be cards that do the destroying for your own cards. The second of which is going to be cards that special summon themselves when another card is destroyed. And finally, cards that do something when they themselves are destroyed. So what's the game plan for the strategy? Well, the main goal is to end on a board that has a lot of powerful interruption, but not necessarily negation. They end up doing this with cards like Sacred Garunix on field, Kirin in hand, of course with cards like either Rang Ballet for spell and trap negation, or Arvada for monster negation on field as well, and of course they want to have Fire King Sanctuary there as well to perform the quick Xyz summon on their opponent's turn. It doesn't put up much 1-for-1 interruption without using hand traps, so it does rely at least a little bit on the Garunix Eternity board wipe. But I will say the deck has an incredible follow-up play. The fact that you have Fire King Barong, Ponix, and Island to be able to consistently get you more cards to your hand is incredible for what the strategy wants to accomplish and can really snowball quite quickly. Also, because of the high stats of all these monsters, it can go for a game pretty easily as well. Now that you know what the cards do and what the deck is trying to accomplish, what is the ratios that we want to see when playing this strategy? Before the release of Phantom Nightmare, if you're going to be playing a pretty pure variant of this deck, you always want to start off with 3 copies of Fire King Ponix. It's the 1-card combo for the deck and the reason why the deck is actually playable. You also want to look at usually 2 to 3 copies of Kirin, but I would play 3 copies of it because it triggers your destruction effects and it lets you get another body on the field for interruption, and the additional non-targeting pop is also really nice. 2 to 3 Sacred Fire King Garunix, this comes down to personal preference. If you play 1 and it gets banished, then you almost lose the duel. If you play 2, it's less consistent, so for that reason, I'm personally playing 3 right now. 2 copies of Arvada because it's your monster negation and it can trigger powerful destruction effects, but I'll be honest, I've seen most lists played at 3 copies right now. 1 or 2 copies of Barong. I personally played at 1 because it can be looped often with cards like Arvada, Garunix Eternity, and even High Avatar Kirin. It's nice to have in the deck though for follow-up, so some lists do play 2, but it's not really a great card to open with unless you open with a way to Fire King Island. 1 Rang Ballet is also pretty common to see. Spell and Trap negation is not as important in the format right now, so it's less likely to see multiple Rang Ballets, but it's a pretty easy special summon regardless. 3 copies of Tenki is also super easy. Not only is it consistency to get you access to your Barong, your Arvada, or even your Rang Ballet, but it's also able to get you a card on the field for other engines. 2 or 3 Sanctuary and 1 or 2 Island. I think 4 total of these cards is the right number, either 2 or 3 Sanctuary, 1 Island. I personally prefer the 2 of each ratio. And then 1 copy each of Skyfire and Circle. If you want a cuttable card as part of the Fire King engine, these ones are definitely the ones to do it. A lot of builds have been cutting them, but I think the utility they provide is so strong for the format today, and the fact that it gets you extra searches off something like Ponix is really nice. You might notice that the Fire King engine is pretty small. It's only about 20 different cards in the entire strategy. So for that reason, we have to pair it with multiple different engines to increase its consistency and up its power level. Some other cards to add into the deck are going to be the Sinful Spoils engine, made up of 3 Wanted, 1 Original Sinful Spoils, and 1 or 2 Black Witch, but most builds are playing 1 copy. As of right now, this is the best secondary engine to play in Fire Kings. It requires the least amount of pieces in both the main and extra deck, and it gives extra access to Ponix, which increases the consistency of the strategy, all without using its normal summon. Snake Eye Ash and Snake Eye Slamber's Dragon are also pretty common to see in the strategy right now, mostly if you're pairing it with the Sinful Spoils engine. It gives you a different level 1 fire to summon off the Sinful Spoils engine, but more importantly than that, it can offer removal or an increased ceiling for the strategy. They won't be a mainstay in Fire King until Snake Eye Populace gets released in Phantom Nightmare, so for the time being, don't be too surprised if you see it, but I definitely wouldn't expect it in every single list. If you don't want to play the Sinful Spoils engine or it's out of your price range, try the Dogmatic engine as well, which is 3 Nadir Servant, 1 Dogmatica Maximus, 1 Garura, and 1 Shureg, and either 1 Farigite or Titaniclad and Fleur-de-Lis. This is just another way to boost consistency by getting you access to Ponix, but you do need to normal summon it. It requires more extra deck space as well, but it's much more budget friendly. Pot of Prosperity is also super common to see in this strategy, but it's not always going to be seeing play. If you're planning to play this on the most budget version possible, you should definitely invest in some Pot of Prosperities. Ash Blossom, definitely play Ash. Not only is it a good hand trap this format, but it's also a fire which helps a lot for multiple reasons in the strategy. And Super Poly is also really nice since the extra deck isn't used too often, you can definitely fit in Super Poly targets. Now let's talk about cards that are going to help beat Fire King, and I'm going to split these up into 3 different categories. The first of which are going to be cards that are good on your turn 0, then we have cards that are good on your turn 1, and finally cards that are good on your turn 2. Starting off with cards that are good on your turn 0, I want to highlight something like Dimension Shifter. This card is absolutely insane against the strategy because right now, all these cards, they need to be destroyed and sent to the graveyard to trigger their effects. Unlike something like Unchained, which just needs to be destroyed, that makes that deck a little bit better than Fire Kings right now. For that reason, D-Shifter ends up being pretty good against this strategy. I also want to highlight Droll and Lockbird. While it may not be the best card against this strategy, it can be quite annoying depending on what variant your opponent is playing. If they're playing an Nadir Servant variant or a Pot of Prosperity, for example, or the first thing they do is search something like Tenki, then you definitely want to hit him with Droll and Lockbird, because for that reason, they won't be able to activate the Pawnics to search for the Sanctuary, which can't get them access to Island. And if you can't get access to Island, you can't search with Island as well, so it makes things really difficult in that regard there as well. But again, it's not the best card to use there. It's something that can come up, but not always. Then we have DD Crow. I think DD Crow is going to see a lot of play this format because of Fire King specifically and how good it is against a few other decks as well. Right now, if you DD Crow something like a Fire King Pawnics when it's trying to resolve and bring back to hand, or if you DD Crow something in the draw phase like Barong, then your opponent can't get the search because they have to be in the graveyard still to resolve their effects, either search or add back to hand, which is really strong for what DD Crow can do. Now let's talk about cards that are good on your turn 1 when you're going first. Starting off, I want to say that every card I covered already is still going to be very good in this strategy, whether you're going first or going second. Secondly, I want to start talking about something like Different Dimension Ground. This is best for trap decks like Labyrinth, but if you can resolve Different Dimension Ground, then all the cards that your opponent will be destroying will go get banished instead of to the graveyard, which means they can't trigger their powerful effects. Then let's talk about Cosmic Cyclone. This is best specifically for the field spell. Because Fire King Sanctuary has a way to protect from destruction, you have to play Cosmic Cyclone to send it to the banish zone, and if you do, then all of your opponent's monsters will get destroyed, which granted will trigger some powerful effects, but if they already use them, then it kind of becomes a bit of a lackluster resolution. Next up is Kashtira Fenrir, which is a really solid card against the strategy, even though it does target, and they can play around that. The reason why is because it forces a really weird style of play from the Fire King player. If you can banish something or threaten to banish a monster, that can be really scary for the strategy. But more importantly than that, if you can banish the Fire King Island face down, they only have a limited number of those cards in the deck, and that's how they get one of their best ways to recur the resources back and have a great grind game with the field spell. And of course, I want to say do not target the monsters unless you know for a fact they don't have any ways to destroy the monster that you targeted. Something like Kirin, Circle, or Skyfire. Do not target unless you know those 3 cards are not in their hand or field. As for cards that are good going second, I'm only going to talk about 2 of them. The first of which being Kashtira Fenrir. This card is so good going second, arguably better than it is going first. If you summon out Fenrir, search for another Fenrir, and then you just proceed with your plays, your opponent goes for Grunix Eternity, blows up the whole board, you can then summon out Fenrir one more time, which is really strong for what the strategy tries to do. Second is Evenly Matched. If they don't have access to Rank Valley, they can't actually negate this card, which is really important because they lose so many valuable resources in the strategy. Now let's talk about cards that I wouldn't play against Fire King right now. The first of which is going to be Nibiru. You don't have to play Nibiru against this strategy. Sure, at times they can go into the extra deck and really go over the 5-summon window, but right now they don't need to. Most of the time they just do their summoning on your turn anyway, so I wouldn't recommend playing Nibiru against this strategy unless they're playing a very heavy extra deck build or it's post Phantom Nightmare. Then we have Summon Limit. I think this card is solid against this strategy in the right situation, but most of the time they only summon 3 or 4 times tops. It'll just slow them down a little bit, but not enough to the point where it's worth it against the strategy. And they can even play Summon Limit themselves and out it with something like Snake Eye Ash, so it's really not that necessary to play against this strategy. Now let's recap here. The first thing we're going to talk about, of course, is Fire King is a deck that loves to destroy their own cards to trigger powerful effects, kind of like Unchained, and they do this by creating a powerful advantage loop. The deck, though, is definitely a mid-range strategy because it doesn't have the most explosive turn 1 combo. On top of that, the deck is able to OTK out of nowhere and it doesn't really need the extra deck too much. The engine is pretty small, so there's plenty of room for consistency pieces and for hand traps. And of course, the deck right now is at a pretty low power level compared to where it'll be post Phantom Nightmare with Snake Eye Populace. And finally, if you guys want to see a deck profile for this strategy, come back in 2 days. And there you have it. You now have an introduction on how to use or beat Fire King. Now let me know down in the comments, what deck are you playing this format, and are you going to be possibly picking up Fire King? I know I definitely will. Now I do want to say that Phantom Nightmares want to give a pretty big power boost to this strategy, so when it does, make sure to come back and I'll give you a new guide for that. If you made it this far in the video, you must have enjoyed it even just a little bit, so do me a favor and smash the like button. If this video hits 125 likes, I'll bring you the ultimate Fire King deck profile with options for budget players too. Today is the beginning of Fire King week. All week long we'll be posting amazing videos on Fire King for all of you. So if that interests you and you want to see more, then consider subscribing for more amazing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh videos and to help us reach our end of year goal of 4,000 subscribers. Oh, and hit the notification bell to get notified whenever I post a new video. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.